Yeah, I'll start with the territorial acknowledgement. Oop, 1 second, I gotta pop it up here. Yeah, so we always like to begin our events by acknowledging that Concordia is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So we always like to share that, and then also for anyone who is watching, joining, or listening, if you're not in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, to just consider where you are and the people that have lived on that land and the relationship that you have with them and that land today. So yeah, so welcome to the Conversation Cafe. And so every week we want to have just a great conversation with a guest about a different topic and we want to create a what we like to call a safe space for brave conversations. So we want to invite people to ask questions, be okay to feel a little uncomfortable, and live in space for growth, and just be together and learn lots of things. And yeah, so I'm going to introduce Lucas, and then Lucas will speak a little bit about his journey, and then we can have a conversation about life across 3 continents and the personal and societal journey and discoveries that he has had. So Lucas, our guest, who is on my left here, he works in the nonprofit sector of data and technology. He's passionate about cultural and religious diversity, personal development, and geek culture. Lucas lived last year in Nepal in a rural municipality of Konjyosom in the Kathmandu Valley, where he worked with the local government office to build communication strategies for civic engagement and environmental awareness. As well, Lucas is a Concordia alumni. He studied international development, I believe.
Political science.
Political science. Okay, yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
I should have had that. And he also worked in the International Students Office. And so, having been born in Brazil, living in Montreal for a long time, and then spending last year in Nepal, he's had a very wide array of cultural experiences, as well as his studies in political science and his work in international development in Nepal, leading him to a lot of discoveries about the world. So thank you for joining us, Lucas. I guess we'll start, you can just share a little bit about your journey, kind of coming from Brazil, why you ended up in Montreal, and then how you ended up in Nepal.
Mm-hmm. For sure, absolutely. So thanks again, Ashley and Ali, for this opportunity. It's always great to talk and share about your stories, right? Everything go through. I believe that everybody has great stories to tell. And there's so much we can learn from one another. And yes, as Ashley said, I was born and raised in Brazil. I left there at the age of 18. I was turning 19 back then. That was already 10 years ago. Can you believe that? I actually moved first to Sherbrooke City, right? Sherbrooke is a small town in the east of Montreal. It's very, very French. And then I moved to Montreal 3 years later, right? And then I went to Nepal to work in international development. For a year, it was late 2018 until 2019. Just to give you a little bit of a background, right? To tell you, well, me as a Brazilian, like, why did I get out of Brazil in the first place, right? Why did I want, like, why people move out of countries and whatnot? I think everybody has a reason, right? I'm going to share with you mine. Actually, before I do, maybe just quickly, if anybody would like to share, right? Whenever you think of Brazil, what comes to your mind, right? Maybe just one or two words. Can I ask you this?
People can type a word in the chat as well.
You can chat. You can say it's fine.
For me, I think rainforest and festivals, really great festivals.
Carnival, yes.
Yeah, that's the first that came to my mind too.
I think of soccer.
Of course, right? Soccer. Who doesn't? Who doesn't think of
Yeah,
soccer?
I think of a great soccer game in 2014.
No. Let's not go there.
Anyway, yeah, that's a bit of a sore point because between someone who grew up in Germany and you. But I just think of it's a big country, but I think recently I also think that it's gotten more conservative with your current president.
Yes, indeed. So it's very interesting to hear what you have to say. It's more or less what Amazon rainforest. Yes, of course. It's really up in the north, right? But the place where I'm from is in the middle of the country. There's no forest. It's just hills. It's far from the ocean, and the climate is like between 15, like the coldest it gets like 15 degrees, and the warmest is 30, right? Can I share? I wanted to show you my street. I found it on Google Earth, on Google Maps. Can I share that? Can I share my screen and show you?
Yeah.
We need to make you co-host.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a sec. No worries.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go, Lucas.
Perfect. So yeah. So can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So this is my street. And this is actually my house. It's funny because we had no trees. I don't know what's going on here. Like this was 10 years ago, right? Okay, so just to ask, like when you look at this, look at the house, like what do you see? Right? Is there anything that you see in common? You might not be easy to see at first. Anything quickly, otherwise I'll just say it. Tell you guys.
Is it the gates?
Yes, gates, and if you can notice, every house has electrified grids, right? Pretty much every house. And this little box here, I don't know if you can see, it's a surveillance camera, right? And down here, they have barbed wire and electrified grid, right? Besides the walls. So, and this is not a wealthy community at all. Like it's middle class-ish, right? It's middle class-ish. So I'm actually gonna stop sharing and go back. Meetings, Zoom meetings. Whoops. What's going on here? I'm sorry, just trying to go back to the meeting. Okay, here, stop sharing. Okay, so I just want to, so my point is, growing up there, yes, of course, there's this beautiful culture, partying. People are very welcoming and nice, but it's a very, very violent country, right? And me growing up there, honestly, since I was 8, I wanted to leave the country. And the reason why is because we actually have some family in the United States. And they would send pictures. And the thing that was struck me the most about houses in North America, like there's a street and there's like maybe this little fence, tiny little fence, or sometimes not even, and then you have the house. I'm like, how is that even possible? Right? Like you don't have a wall, like you know. So I grew up like really frustrated with all of this crime, and indeed it's really just to give you a little bit of perspective. The murder rate in Canada is something like 1 person per 100,000. In Brazil as a whole, it's 30. So it's basically 30 times higher than Canada, just to give you a little bit of perspective. So growing up, all I really wanted was to go to a place where I could leave my house and not worried about getting mugged or none of that. And also to have the freedom to choose what I wanted, right? Because in Brazil, because of the extreme like inequality and all of that. You really need to have like a really good job in order to leave your parents' house. Normally, what happens, you get married and then you just move to the backyard. And then once your parents grow older, you move to the main house and you live with your family, like you live with your parents. People don't move out of your house that much unless you get a really good job, and it's be like med school or law or engineering, and not just any. It has to be like from the best high schools, right? And sometimes you need to do like go through these tests to get into the public service, right? Otherwise, you can't. There's like no social mobility. So what I really wanted was really to go to a place where I could choose what I wanted to do, right? And not do something just because that would be the thing that would ensure my survival, right? So I had this chance to come to Canada. And actually, my siblings came first. And they first moved to Sherbrooke City, right? And I was like, okay, so this is it. This is my chance. I'm gonna go there, study, and I'm gonna have like, and my life going to be changed forever, right? Um, so yeah, so I got there. I actually applied for nursing because I had heard that Canada needed lots of nurses, and I'm like, okay, why not, right? This is going to increase my chance of immigrating. And how hard can it be, right? Nursing, it's technical, bro. Because in Brazil, we have this thing that technical school, like post-secondary education, if it's not university, then it's easy. Anybody can do, right? And then I went there and did it. It was a nightmare. It was so hard. I barely made out of it. And but it turns out that it doesn't really matter what you study here in Canada. You have the same right to apply for permanent residency. Some of you, if you're international students, you might already be looking into how to immigrate. You're probably aware of the Quebec Experience Program, right? Um, but anyway, the thing is, one of the first thing that I realized when I got here is that, of course, it was not the paradise that I thought it would be. Yes, there was a lot of safety, right? There were no walls, there were no like electrified grid, and I could choose what I wanted. Um, but all of a sudden, I'm different, right? Like I was in Sherbrooke City, and everybody's Quebecois, and everybody is, like it's white, right? And I'm like, all of a sudden, I'm different. Like I remember people even had a hard time pronouncing my name. Like whenever they would do like the like what they call the names in the beginning, take the prizes from people. Like they would get to my name, they would hesitate, and I knew that was me, right? So that's the thing. Like I realized like how Brazilian I was, right? In the beginning, I started noticing like all of these cultural differences. That yeah, Brazil, there's so much violence and all of those terrible things, but we're such a strong community. Like people are so open and social. It's like introverts have a real hard time in Brazil. I'm still an introvert. Back in high school in Brazil, I need to run, like, and trying to hide to have my lunch alone. Otherwise, people wouldn't let me. Somebody would come and, hey, what are you doing there alone? Come join, have lunch with us. You know, where are you here in Canada? It's a bit of the opposite. And with time, I understood that people didn't do that because they were mean. It's just because they have a lot of respect for personal space, right? They see somebody on their own, they're gonna leave them there, right? They're just doing their thing. They're gonna respect it. That doesn't mean that they're trying to exclude them, right? But it took me time to realize that. So, and I also realized that I was really religious. In Brazil, it's a very Christian country, right? Sometimes I like to say that even atheists in Brazil believe in God. I didn't call myself a religious person in Brazil, but of course I believe in God. I mean, like, who doesn't in Brazil, right? But then here in Canada, especially in Quebec, people were very Catholic. But that was, I believe, until the Quiet Revolution, right? And then after that, people became very secular. And people would ask me if I was religious. I'm like, no, I'm not religious. But then, like, in my perspective, believing in God, believing in Jesus, and being just like a mere Christian, is not being religious. Like to me, religious was like really going to church every day, doing everything that they ask you to do, or being like super Protestant or super Catholic, right? This is something else I realized. So with time, well, it goes without saying, it was really hard. The first couple of years, like I sort of isolated myself from all this difference, right? That I noticed, like I isolated myself, right? And the thing is, even though there were people who would reach out to me, in the beginning, when you think that, people might be discriminating against you, maybe some of them are, you don't know, right? But some of them maybe they're not, because as I mentioned, because of individualism, right? You respect people's spaces. Um, but in the beginning, you don't really know that. It wasn't until the end that I started getting involved a little bit in Sherbrooke in these international student committees, that I realized that Quebec people, like, they were like that. Like, they don't go and approaching people like randomly, right? And they respect your space. I really wish I had known that since the beginning, right? But by then my mind was already set. I really wanted to move to Montreal. And the reason why I really wanted to go to Montreal, I still remember, I think it was this summer, I went there, I think 2013. We went to pick up a cousin who was also moving to Montreal. And I noticed in the streets, I've been to Montreal in winter before that, right? But you can see people because they're all covered up. But in summer, everybody, you can see people. And I could see, oh my God, I could walk in the street and nobody could say that I'm not from there, right? You have people from all over the world in Montreal. And I'm like, oh my God, I gotta be here, right? I need to move here. And that's why it was one of the main reasons why I moved to Montreal, right? Because I felt like I could blend in and I could be different, and that would be totally fine. So that was it. I moved to Montreal. Then later on, I got into Concordia. I started studying political science. But by this time, this honeymoon that I had with Montreal was a bit over, because I realized that I was becoming friends with all these international people, like all of these immigrants and stuff. But what about the actual Canadians, right? I still didn't really have that many Canadian friends. And when I got into Concordia, it was a little bit of the same thing. Like, I was having a bit of a harder time becoming friends with actual local people, right? I still felt like there were so many barriers, and most of my friends were international, right? And especially due to the international students office, I also felt like I was in paradise there, because like everybody's from all over the place, and also the MFSC, right? Everybody like is so diverse. So being different like felt great, because I was like everybody else. Um, and interestingly enough, right, something else that I thought of when I was moving out of Brazil, right? My goal was really to integrate 100%. Like, I wanted to speak French all the time. I wanted to fully embrace Quebecois culture. That was before arriving in Quebec. And then I realized that was just not possible. Like, there's so much to you, your values, your norms. These things go really, really deep, right? You might be familiar with that iceberg, like cultural iceberg, right? What you see in the surface, like clothing, food, is really the top of the iceberg. But culture runs really deep. It's how you see the world, how you communicate, right? How you see people's roles in society, right? And and yeah, just so you know, despite all of my willingness to really like integrate and all of that, it still wasn't possible. Um, until later on, I just realized that, like around my time, like later in my Concordia years, that when you immigrate, you kind of you set off, like your plane takes off but never really lands anywhere, um, right? You always remain in this like intercultural. You're a bit of everything, and you never fully become anything. You're just you, right? You're just you. Um, and that was me, my mindset back then, before I went to Nepal. And okay, so Nepal now. So my goal was to start working in international development because I really wanted to, I don't know, help this world become a better place, especially people from less developed countries. I really wanted to contribute and help them and help these countries develop in a way that so that people won't need to, like leave everything behind and go to another country. I would think to myself, how great would it be if everybody in the world could either stay there or leave, but there was purely their choice and they were not forced to, right? That was one of my main motivations to do international development. In Nepal, because I had this opportunity through this NGO, it's called CICI, I already had this contact with them, and I really wanted to work in democratic governance, and there was this really cool project there. Um, and once I got there, I was placed in this rural area, about an hour and a half away from Kathmandu. And it's a village. I was the only foreigner there, right? Out of 10,000 people, I was the only foreigner. People would barely speak English, right? Nobody could speak English besides my counterpart, the person I would work closely with in the municipality. And obviously, it's a completely different reality. It's insane. It's insane. Like the moment you get into the city, right? There are no traffic lights. There are no traffic lights. You have animals, like in the streets. You have cows in the street. You have chicken and dogs. There are more. Sometimes like there's so many dogs. In some places, I could swear there are more dogs than people living in the streets. And people are so welcome, right? In the rural area, like everybody says hi, right? Some people are really shy, but when you break the ice and say something their language, like they come and invite you to their place and have tea with them, right? And it's a completely different atmosphere. Like nature is all around you, right? And people have this harmony living with nature. Religiously, it's really interesting, right? Because people like to say that they're both Buddhists and Hindus, right? It's a bit of a mix of both. So some kinds of Buddhism that they have there, they have these deities, and from my understanding, I think traditional. I don't know if I can even say that traditional Buddhism, it didn't really have a god, if I'm not mistaken. But in Nepal, the Buddhists they have their own deities, right? And of course, and then the vast majority of the population it's also Hindu. But funny enough, in my village there were Christians. There were like 3 churches in my village, right? And I was really surprised to see that. I had no idea. The funny thing is sometimes in one family you would have someone who would be like a preacher, and then everybody were Buddhists. And people would participate in each other's events with no problem, right? You would have a Christian event, everybody from their family would come, whether doesn't matter your religion, right? And sometimes you would have this Buddhist event, you would have Christians come over as well, right? And I felt like, oh my God, this this is crazy, right? I've never seen like this before. Um, but there's the other thing though, like it's not all sunshines and rainbows, right? It's one of the poorest countries in the world. Although everybody's able to live and survive off their land, they couldn't even dream of leaving their countries. They couldn't even dream of it. The barriers are so many because of the currency difference. Like it's the Nepali rupee is worth like 1,000 less than the American dollar. And most people leave the country just to go work in places like in the Middle East or Malaysia, and they say that is about 10,000 youth leave the country per day to work abroad, right? And I noticed that I would talk to everybody, like everybody had a family member, especially a young man who would go and work in Middle Eastern countries, right? Or in Malaysia, or has already been there, because there's not a lot of work for them, right? And of course, like if you're a woman, well, of course, the gender roles there are really, or it's very traditional, right? For instance, like in the South, well, the country's really changing quite a bit ever since it became a republic in 2015. They're trying to forbid marriage before the age of 20, but in some places, like in the Terai, in the south of the country, you would still have child marriage, right? And some girls would get married at the age of 11. Traditionally, if you get married, you go to your husband's village, right? If they're good people, good for you, right? If they're bad people, you know, um, yeah. But the thing is, despite all of this, people still smile, right? They're still happy. And I spoke with my good friend there. By the way, I'm still in touch with a lot of people there. They became great friends. My buddy from there, he's a preacher in this small community church, and also work with me in the municipality. I asked him, like, how come people are so happy, right? And he said that it was a matter of perspective. Actually, no, expectation. They did not expect things to be different. This is what they had, and they were content, right? They didn't really wish more than that. And one day I had this really interesting conversation with the housekeeper. I was living in this in this house in this homestay. The landlady, she's this businesswoman, right? She's in her 40s, never got married. She would always traveling around, right, and doing business here and there. So whoever would stay, the person who would stay the most of the time in the house was her sister-in-law. Her name is Anita. She had 3 kids, and her husband is working in, I believe, in Saudi. No, it's in a Middle Eastern country, right? One day I was having coffee, right, in the garden, right, and she came over. She had a new phone, right? She had this smartphone. Her older daughter gave that one to her. It was like her older daughter's smartphone, and she gave it to her. It was plenty of pictures of her older daughter, right? And she sat down. She was showing me the pictures of her daughter, right? And she was really proud to say that she was in Kathmandu working, and she will not get married before 30 because she really wants to work and study before she gets married. And she was saying that how different this was from her life because she works in the field all day. She would wake up at 5 a.m. to go climb the hills to cut trees to feed the goats, right? And she was say, like, everything hurts, right? My hands hurt, my feet hurt, it's so hard. But she was so happy that her daughter had this chance to go and work. So that really got me thinking, right? Because often we like to say, oh no, we really need to leave people do their own thing, leave them on their own, right? Don't touch them at all, right? And often there's a lot of criticism on international development. We actually like to talk to it more as refer to it more as international cooperation, right? Because we're more working with and not working for. And very often the criticism is that we're imposing things on people, right? Maybe imposing the way that we see the world, right? On certain aspects, I agree, but then on this one, right? I thought to myself, hey, what if everybody, right, had the freedom to choose what they want, right? If they wanted to live a traditional life, they could. But if they wanted to do something different, they could as well, right? I don't know, maybe somebody from this really small, tiny indigenous community in some place in the world, maybe they've never seen an airplane in their lives. Maybe they would see one and they would be like, oh my God, what is this? Maybe it's a god, maybe it's a demon. But maybe there would be one kid who would look at that plane. I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could fly that. Maybe there would be one kid there who wished to do that. And I imagine, like, how great would it be if people, all over the world could live traditionally if they wanted to, but if they wanted to just go and live in the country and have a completely different life, they could as well. So one of the main lessons from Nepal is that perhaps there are things that are objectively true to the human condition. And I think freedom, right? Freedom to choose what we want, it's one of them. And perhaps this could precede even culture, right? Perhaps everybody could like to choose what they want to believe in or not, or do what they want, right? Um, so yeah, I think that basically covers it. I mean, there's so much more I could unpack from all of this experience, but yeah, I think I would like to hear you folks talk a little bit, maybe impressions and ask questions, right? I think I spoke enough.
Thank you so much. That was a really engaging, like, felt like you're sharing your life story, and it was just really interesting to see sort of just the way that your sense of self changed over time, but then also how your sense of understanding around the world changed over time. And when we spoke before, you talked a bit about how international development, which as a field has been kind of controversial, is like becoming more international cooperation.
Yes.
And I find that really interesting and really fitting with what you were saying about, like choice and people having choice and freedom. But yeah, I would love to hear if you guys have any questions or any other comments or anything for Lucas as well.
I just want to say you're welcome to type it in the comments too. I'll start off though. I have a ton of questions, Lucas. Very basic one is if you learned the language in Nepalese. But the deeper one is I was really struck by your comment that when you came to Canada, you just wanted to fit in, and then you realized that you never really do that. You'll always be a citizen now of 2, maybe 3 countries. And I found that interesting because I'm also an immigrant, but I certainly feel very Canadian, but I'm white. So I'd love to hear more about that. And did that perception change after your experience in Nepal?
For sure, definitely. So first question, yes, I learned Nepali, and I can speak like basic Nepali. Although in the place where I lived, it's they had a different language. Like in Nepal, they have like 100 languages, right? It's called the Tamang. I learned a few Tamang words, but they would use Nepali mostly to work, right? Your second question, honestly, to be very honest with you, like since Canada became, it's such a multicultural country now. Like even the people that are white, okay, I know you're German, right? They're people who are like from Great Britain or France or Ireland or Scotland. All of these countries have different cultures, right? And maybe they sort of more or less blend in over the decades and maybe the centuries. And I think it's really a matter of who's been here the longest. Like, I think the longest you stay here, the more things tend to more or less blend in. Probably if you give me like another 10 years, uh, I'm gonna start feeling very Canadian. But I think like this matter of like identity, I mean like what is Canadian, right? What is a Canadian? So it's a really good point. And with time, I would maybe talk to second generation immigrants, like people who are Canadian. They would still have the same like identity issue. Like they don't know if they're Canadian or they're from their parents' cultural background. And I mean, like if nobody thinks that they're Canadian, like then then who gets to say what is a Canadian, right? Like who gets to say that, right? I mean, maybe the people who've been here like the longest are the indigenous communities. I don't think we look like them in terms of culture and language and all of that, right? So it's a really good point, and probably with time, I'll have more of established communities, right? I do intend in taking more part in a church, right? Ashley introduced me to her church, and I love that. Maybe with time, I build more communities. I would start feeling more Canadian, right? Because before that, most of my friends were international, and they laughed, and it's hard to feel like rooted in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a great discussion. What is Canadian? And we get a lot of students at Concordia who come to us and say, but where are the Canadians? Like, I don't know what that qualifies. I don't, is it a passport? Is it because you've been here long enough? Is it, sort of the ins and outs, or some of the cultural norms, the unspoken cultural norms. So I hear that, but I think it's more like in your soul, where do you belong? To me, that's sort of, like where in my soul do I feel home? And I only have two places, and I certainly feel more at home in this country. And even that's loaded in terms of, it's as a settler, as you say, we started with the territorial acknowledgement, but I certainly feel more of a stranger when I go home, which is visiting my sisters in Germany, and I feel like I klutz, because I don't even feel I mess up constantly, just in terms of how to say hi and how to, some of the things you do that I knew as a kid and no longer. So, but the question, like, and I would ask everyone that, where are you at home in your soul? And maybe it's not even a country, maybe it's a physical location, like the forest or the ocean, or with friends. Yeah,
I see. Maybe I will let the others reply, if anybody wants to jump in and say anything.
Maybe they're just listening. I don't know if
That's fine.
yeah,
it's okay. But yeah, true. Like it's a very good point. And something that I realized, like I started to realize very recently. Harrison raised a hand. I'm gonna let him go.
Yeah. No, just because I do find it like also interesting, like what is a Canadian, right? Like it's hard to come up with such a definition. It's not really, and this is from somebody who was born here too, and who's lived here for his whole life, right? I look at Canada as like a multicultural, basically, like we are our people. And right, so like you look at our people, and like we do of course have commonalities in the way we maybe behave, or and whatnot, but there's nothing really that makes a Canadian a Canadian. It's to me, a Canadian is somebody that's or I'd like to think on the most part are people that are kind and that are welcoming, and open to hearing others people's point of views. And so like I think there's definitely a Quebecois identity. If we move to Quebecois identity, that is a definite identity. But in terms of a Canadian identity, I like personally, I relate because I'm Anglophone. I guess I relate more to the Canadian identity than the Quebecois identity of just being, of course, my parents being from the roots of immigrants and whatnot. But also, I think that like I've grown closer over the years to like the Quebecois identity, which was weird for me, because that is its own kind of culture, identity, language, practices, etc. So I find it easier to distinguish.
I wonder how someone who's racialized would answer that, because I think the sort of whole notion of what you say, Harrison, I agree, like Canadians were kind and hopefully compassionate and say sorry a lot and whatever else we think of ourselves. But I also think that view is really being challenged by the discussion on race and privilege. So I mean, I don't want to go further with that, because I think to really dig into that, we would actually need a racialized person,
Maybe
but Lucas, you
cafe.
mentioned
Mhm.
another cafe. Except Lucas, I when I asked you my question, I said maybe it's different for me because I'm a white woman from a European country, and I
Mhm.
mean race is such a construct. I don't know how you. I guess you would
Yeah.
describe yourself as a Latino, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that is I don't know, and put wouldn't see wise, but and that's why sort of that question about where is my
Mhm.
soul at home, I find super interesting.
So it's a really good point. So really, just now I understand your question better. Just to answer it quick. Indeed, I don't have to be honest with you. I was just thinking about that these days, right? I don't feel like I have a racial identity. I'm like 23% African. I actually did that genetic test. I'm like 23% like from Angola, Democratic Republic of Congo, um, and then like 67% Iberian, like from Spain and Portugal. Some like Western European. There's even like Jewish blood in me. So what is that? What race is that? Like, it's a mix of a lot of stuff, right? That doesn't really identify me. Latin America is where it come from, but I don't feel very Brazilian. Like, if you know Brazilian people, I don't like soccer, right? I don't like partying too much. Um, and honestly, I grew up very, very, very Christian. As I went through immigration, I explored a lot agnosticism, right? And different ways of seeing the world, different worldviews. And recently, I grew closer, way closer to my Christian roots, right? And today, I feel at home in Christianity, like in more of a mere Christianity, to put it that way. This is where I feel like more comfortable, like my soul feels comfortable, right? Not really a place per se, right? Not really a physical place, but just where my soul and my heart feels good, right? So yeah, it's
That's like, I think like a beautiful sentiment, and I think also kind of gets to, you talk about, all these cultural distinctions and stuff, but there are universals, and like, what does it mean to be human? And like for
exactly.
me, when I hear you talk about all of these different experiences and how your sense of identity is shifted, is like, I think we're like, since we're all talking about identity and what it is it to be Canadian or Brazilian, or where are you a local, is like, we are so globalized. We're interacting with each other, and when I grew up in Nova Scotia, and like most of the people in my high school, their last name started with Mac. Well, it's a very UK oriented province. And I never really thought much about that. But when I came to Quebec, it was multicultural and also very French. And so I actually was like, oh, what does it mean to be even a Nova Scotian? Like, and I think, I think a lot of people are wrestling with identity. Like, how do we be something? What does it mean to be, and is our cultural identity the most important? Or, I think that's another question, is like, is our national identity important so much as other identities? Because it seems to me like, from what we discussed, even when you and I were chatting before this, that like cultural and national identity used to be more important, but now your spiritual identity has sort of taken precedence on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that really interesting. And I wonder, kind of what the world would be like if people placed an emphasis that wasn't so much on these like nationalistic like labels and identities and that, and instead placed it on like, I don't know where I'm going with that.
But yeah, it's a very interesting topic. Like, this could be an entirely another cafe, right? To talk about this.
Well, it's come up before in cafes about that whole question of identity. I think it's also a question at a university age where you ask yourself, so I'm not my parents, I'm not my hometown, like, just my hometown, who am I? And so I find it interesting, Ashley said that spiritual identity is more prevalent, because my sense is religious identity used to be important, and it's not. I don't necessarily see spiritual identity rising
I meant
yet.
for Lucas.
Oh,
like,
I see. Got it. Yeah.
personally
Yes, I
it has-
see.
yeah.
Yeah. So the other, I want to take us in a slightly different direction, if I may, though. But thanks for clarifying that. But I was really surprised by your comment that in Nepal, where people just seemed more content, and it's because they didn't have expectations, and that to me is a real challenge. Like I
Okay.
do have expectations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of it is stereotypes. So of course I would have expectations if I went to Brazil to see, dancing, anywhere I could see the rainforest, of course, even though if I looked at a map, I knew that was wrong. But even here, I do have the expectation that the world is moving towards understanding and peace. I do have the expectation that in this country, in this political entity, we actually do want to respect each other and build a society where all are valued. I have the expectation that somehow COVID will be over and we'll be back at the office again. And not to have expectations, that really pushes my buttons, I have to say. So I'd love to hear more.
Okay. No problem at all. Just quick second, because I was supposed to have a meeting now, but it was pushed, which is great. Yeah, no
Can
worries
I
at all.
add about the spirituality something?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, let us know, Lucas, if you have to go. Just like
No.
Yeah.
No.
And we keep an eye on the time anyway, so maybe we'll take one or two more questions, and then we'll wind it down. So yeah.
But it's funny because my meeting was pushed, so I got time. I can just quickly answer your question. So expectation, in the sense, from what I understood from him, is that, for example, in the villages, right, they have this traditional way of living, and that's how they do, right? They look forward to fulfilling that, like the roles, and seeing their children growing up, right, and perhaps seeing their the things that they cultivate grow, seeing their family be happy. These general things that, for example, they do not expect to maybe like go and get a job and get wealthy and rich. However, the people that are more that like have been going to school, have been learning about the world, they have different ambitions, right? They have, of course, they have different expectations. But I'm talking a little bit more about the people that are more like in the rural areas. But of course, this way, this lifestyle, this worldview doesn't really change overnight, right? They have this more circular view of time, right? So they really take their time to do anything. They really live in the moment in a certain way. They live with their family. They behold their traditions and religious beliefs, and they're not expecting. They don't think, oh, I should be wealthier, like I should be richer, or things should be better, right? This was my understanding when he told me that.
So it's about contentment and enough, yeah.
For me, I find it really interesting because it seems like two extremes, like, and that neither is better than the other, but like in that sort of cultural setting, people are much more content. But it seems like since they don't expect as much, like they don't necessarily like try for as much. But here in the West, like we have a lot of expectations and we're very go, and we're so success oriented that like, burnout is a whole cultural phenomenon, and a lot of people are very dissatisfied with their lives, and we have the highest rate of antidepressant use in the world in North America. And it's just really interesting to see like these two vastly different ways of looking at life, and just kind of what comes along with that. And it just kind of makes you question like, well, what's, I don't know.
Yeah. Bhargav, you also had a question. I heard you say something earlier.
No, I wanted to add that like you talked about spirituality, right?
Yeah.
So here like whenever I visit villages, uh, as Lucas said that the people don't have expectation, they don't know about spirituality at all, but they they practice it even though they don't know such thing exist, because they have like created such rules and the expectation and views over their by their forefathers knowledge and all. They even reject going to the cities and to get successful and money and all that. They just live there, do their work, and be happy. And for them, the criteria for happiness is like doing whatever they want and just enjoying the life with the nature, not this like being successful, expecting tons of money and at all.
Hmm. Hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anybody else? Otherwise, we can wrap up. And yeah, this was super great. I feel like we could talk for another several hours about so many different aspects of, from spirituality to the like global community and identity, and all of these sorts of questions are things that we can't really answer in an hour, maybe ever. But it's really nice to just kind of sit with those questions together and to hear people's different experiences and to just explore all of that. So thank you, Lucas, for creating space for those questions.
It's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure.
And thank you for your very personal reflections, which I think certainly have challenged me to think again about how my different communities and my the different sense of belongings that I have and how they integrate. And it doesn't just have to be with 2 or 3 different countries. It could even be with different communities here. How does it affect me that I'm a Concordia student and a member of a faith community and someone involved in the whatever environmental movement or something? How do they connect? And so but I really appreciated your honest reflection.
My pleasure.
Alrighty, I guess we will wrap up then and let you have a little break before your meeting. So thank you again for joining us. This was really wonderful. I hope that everybody who joined us today had a really good experience. And yeah, and Ellie, before we go, do you want to tell us about next week's cafe?
I'd love to. So next week's cafe is back at the regular time at 2 p.m., just in case you're interested in coming. And it's Just Kaur, who is the Sikh member of our multi-faith network. And she's an artist and she does mantra art. And so we're actually going to do art together. We will each do it at home in our own way, and there are resources we may send you, but it's a reflection on how that art fills us, how it feeds us spiritually as humans. And it's just a fun, hopefully fun way to also just get us out of our very logical way of thinking, sort of more into a heart space. So check it out. They're all interesting. Every conversation is, I think I learned so much, and I'm really grateful for them. So I hope you can join us again next week. And thanks so much, Lucas. And it's just great to see you and hear what you've been up to.
Yes, equally. All right, no problem. Thank you, Bhargav, Harrison, Lori, Ellie, Ashley, all of you for listening.